Yeah, so just a quick word of introduction for Dale Turner. Actually, needs no introduction from many people here because he's been part of a meeting that the some of the CICADA leaders were at in February, and also Dale did some of his education at McGill University with Charles Taylor and Jim Tully. Some years ago, is now at Dartmouth College, is a political philosopher, and turn it over to Dale, who's chairing this session and this group.
Great, thank you. So I guess I should start off by saying Montreal's playing Toronto tonight. So in conclusion, come all the way from New Zealand to hurry it up. It's been a great day. It's been a long day. It's been wonderful to meet people, and it's in this beautiful place, part of the world. Our project really started off as a project on the question. Okay, sorry. Is that better? Okay. Good? Okay, thanks. So I'll just say a few words so we can listen to the presenters, the awesome presenters. The project of which Nick Rio at the end is the principal investigator. Is we looked at the question sort of was what role does Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous ways of thinking about the world play in the processes and outcomes of river restoration co-management agreements. So there are 3 communities that are involved in this project, 2 Anishinaabe communities and the Maori, the Waikato Tainui from New Zealand Maori community. And we, August and September of 2014, we visited Bakejwanon and the Grand Traverse Band, and then in March we took a trip to visit the Waikato Tainui, and it was wonderful. It was really, I think, interesting and important to sit back and listen to some of the wisdom keepers and the elders interacting from different communities. So that was quite a learning experience. So we're going to hear from each one of the communities, and and then Nick will come in at the end and say a few words, and then do the question and answers period. So we'll begin with the Waikato Tainui, who have come a long way to be here today, and they've been in, I think, was it 8 hours? 8 hours in a car from Maine today, so I know they're raring to go. So we'll hear from Huriwai Paki and Ashleigh Turner. So they'll start us off.
Kāti kia ora huiwi tātou. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko tae mai nei ki tēnei kaupapa, ki te wānanga i te kaupapa o te pōnei. Kua nui te hari mō tō koutou manua nui ki te awhina ki te hui hui mai i ngā āhuatanga. E hāngai ana ki tēnei kaupapa. Kia ora everybody. As Dale said, my name is Huriwai Paki, and this is my colleague Ashleigh Turner, and we will be the first community within this presentation to talk about our efforts for river restoration. So just within the brief time that we have for this presentation, we'll firstly just go over an overview of who is Waikato Tainui, who are we as a tribe, our particular search for redress, and then we go straight into what our river settlement is, particular aspects within the river settlement, some of the learnings that we've learned from the other 2 communities that you will hear about later on tonight, and then a brief conclusion with a video. So, Waikato Tainui as a snapshot. Essentially, within the the centre of the world, as we know, called New Zealand. Waikato Tainui is the 4th largest tribe. Yes, it's a huge number of 56,000 people. And essentially, when we all migrated over to New Zealand, nearly over 1,000 years ago, Waikato was part of a waka called Tainui. From that waka, we had a number of other tribes that came out and expanded from where we all started in Kawhia and then expanded all around the North Island. Currently, we have 68 marae, or communities, and they all affiliate to one of 33 hapu, or sub-tribes. At a governance level, we have a 2-part governance structure. The first part there in the blue is our tribal parliament called Te Kauhanganui. Essentially, it is 68 of our communities who elect 3 of their own members to go on the tribal parliament, being over 200 people. 1 youth voice, 1 adult voice, and 1 elder voice, so that they have a wide representation. Then it drops down into the second tier, the yellow space there. That is our executive board called Te Aratauta. Essentially, they make the day-to-day decisions of where our tribe heads to. They are elected from the wider parliament, and 1 is elected from our king. And then the green space there, dropping it down a level, is our operational arm. So we have a commercial arm, a social arm, environmental arm, and so on. In terms of our particular journey to reaching the settlement that we have, within New Zealand, there is one major treaty, being the Treaty of Waitangi in 1840, essentially the foundation document for New Zealand in regards to its relationship with Maori. After around 20 years of that, and because of tensions within that space, Waikato and a number of other tribes formed a political movement called the Kingitanga Movement to try and prevent settler land dealings that were happening and intertribal warfare. 5 years later, the Crown crossed over our tribal boundaries and essentially confiscated 1.2 million acres, being everything in that red boundary. And essentially we were exiled out to just on the bottom left of that red boundary. From the time of that confiscation right up to now, we have been on a very long journey to seek redress for our people. That has ranged from international engagement, trying to seek audiences with the British Crown at different times, as well as attempts to be on the New Zealand Legislative Council. In 1927, a Royal Commission report was published, known as the Sim Report, which looked not at the actions of how the Crown invaded and confiscated our land, but rather the excessiveness of that confiscation. The Crown labelling us rebels, took our land, and they took all that land. This report was designed to say not whether it was justified, but whether it was excessive. It concluded it was excessive, and so an early settlement was done in 1946. Sometime later, 50 years later, we had a land settlement, the first of its kind in New Zealand, essentially where we tried to seek compensation as well as land sites within that area that was confiscated. Another 15 years after that, we have the Waikato River settlement. My colleague Ashleigh will be doing certain slides as well.
Okay, so in 2009, we had the settlement for a river. It is the longest river in New Zealand, and so it's 425 kilometres. We're not the only iwi, or the only tribe that lives on the river. Sorry, I'm mindful of time. But so as a tribe, we have a really deep connection with our awa. So awa means river, and our ancestors used our awa as a means to trade. They participated in traditional and recreational activities. They collected food from our awa. and they celebrated a lot of events. Currently, koi carp is the dominant pest biomass in the river, so there's lots of it, and we're currently working on eradicating that pest. And there's 8 dams sitting along our awa. So the overarching purpose of our settlement is to restore and protect the health and well-being of the river for future generations. So we recognise our upcoming generations. In our settlement, a whole lot of things dropped out, a whole lot of mechanisms. The key ones being the establishment of the organisation that Huriwai and I work for, called the Waikato River Trust, as well as an organisation called the Waikato River Authority. Two other mechanisms were 11 ministerial accords and 4 joint management agreements with council. So the vision and strategy is what the Waikato River Authority looks after. So they administer a fund that came out of our settlement to restore the full length of the river, and the organisation that we work for, the Waikato River Trust, we look after the picture on the left. So we are responsible for restoring our section or our tribal area of the river. These are the 2 core principles of our river settlement. The first one being manawa te awa, which recognises that our awa is our ancestor, and recognises her as a being. And the second principle being mana whakahaere, so recognising us as kaitiaki or caregivers of the river. We're currently 5 years into our settlement. We've managed to achieve quite a few things in this short time frame. So currently we have a number of ongoing restoration projects. We are currently engaged with our youth to teach them about the importance of our awa. We have 2 ongoing investments that look at delivering on environmental aspirations as well as some kind of economic return. But at the same time, we also have a number of ongoing challenges. So probably the main one here being with our co-management fund runs out in 2040, so the pressure is on us at the moment to look at innovative ways for how we might continue to receive or draw on financial resourcing to fund our projects moving forward. So this is our first, only, and late Māori Queen, Te Atairangi Kahu, who encouraged us to draw strength from our partnerships. We recognise everyone here and the people of this land, in particular our colleagues from our confluence, and the collaborative effort that we're all trying to restore some kind of waioranga rivers of fresh water. So, in conclusion, we acknowledge that the recognition of Indigenous rights is an ongoing battle, but we really like to acknowledge everybody here. So, mindful of time, so if you have any questions, that's probably where we'll look at the majority of our work. Kia ora.
So we're just trying to upload a video that we have of one of our projects within that river settlement, being that the tribe is able to create its own plan of how it sees the restoration of our river, and that the councils, the Crown, different agencies have to actually recognise and provide for or take into serious consideration when they do any activities on the river. So what you saw there was just a brief video of our environmental area, different sites, different land sites, coasts, parts of our river. The first group of people you would have saw there were our late kings and queen, and then the last man, the picture you would have saw there is our current king, King Tuheitia. Thank you very much, everybody. We look forward to hearing everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. I was getting closer. I thought I was going to have to tell a joke, but you were saved from that. Now we can hear from my friends from Walpole Island First Nation, or Bekeshwanon, Aimee Johnson and Chris Riley.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Miigwech de kid noon gugishgak. Nigishgat, the Nishnabad newswin. Pachagua, Mommy Quendam. Mompi Aya. She can't do them. Piketwanong the Bendagus. Tom Gopi, Ngajame, Mompi. Mompi a king. Pachagua Naj win Mompi. Long ago, but not so long ago, there was a young boy who was raised by his grandfather and his grandmother. His grandmother and his grandfather were speakers of their original language that we call Nishnabemwin. They understood the practices, the ceremonies that our ancestors did. They understood that relationship that our ancestors had with everything that is around us. So as a young boy, he grew up listening to this language, these sounds that were and are very descriptive. Verb-based, we say today. He would go outside with them and he'd hear them talk to spirits in the realm of everything that is living, they acknowledged. He would hear them say, Miigwech mtiguk, kinegeko gamijang. Thank you, trees, for everything that you have given us. Chimigwech and Dinag Shkok Mekwe, Kinegego Gamisha. Thank you, Mother Earth, for everything that you have given us. Meanwhile, Chimigwech Wesiyak, Kinegego Gamisha. He would hear them thank the animals for everything that they have given us. Meanwhile, Nessa win, Kachimigwech and Danak. They even thanked our Mother Earth for the air that we breathe. Meanwhile, Chimigwech, Gimijang, Nipe, Magabish, meanwhile, Zibe. But the one that stuck with him the most was when they thanked the water. It's something he never forgot. It was a part of him, and he understood that. They took the time to acknowledge Nipe. In our language, when we say be, just that sound alone, it acknowledges life. There's something about that sound that connected with our people, our ancestors, and they understood it. It was so clear. Be. Nipe. In our language, when we say nebe, we're referring to water. But it's so much more than that. Nipe is life. Zibe. They would stand out along the river's edge and thank our Mother Earth for zi be. You hear that sound in there, be, zi be, makes reference to that water that flows. If I share in English, it would be a river. But it's so much more than that. The understanding is contained within those sounds when they're put together. But the most important is that root, be, life. Meanwhile, Anishinaabe and Dao. When I say Anishinaabe and Dao, I'm saying I am Anishinaabe. What is Anishinaabe? A good being. You might have heard of tribes like Lakota, Sioux, Ojibwe, Mohawk, and so on. For us, how we called ourselves, how we referred to ourselves, was simply Anishinaabe. My brother, Anishinaabe. My sister, Anishinaabe. More than one Anishinaabek. As this young boy grew, he would hear references made by his grandparents. Anishinaabe bid ma dizawin. If you listen carefully, you can hear that again, that be, which acknowledges life. That the Anishinaabe way of life is to take time and express our gratitude for a lot of things that we take for granted. That is our way to take that time. But there's something even more relevant here. And that's that nepe, that life. Because it's not something that is just with our culture alone. It's a necessity for all life. We had just went on a trip. We come from Penobscot, Maine, where a Nikan Anishinaabe shared with us, a brother Anishinaabe, about challenges that he and his community are facing when it comes to nebe, this life. Meanwhile, zibe, the rivers in his area. But he says something that is so important out of all the things that he shared that resonated with me. When he spoke of the river and how he related to the river as it's who we are. We are the river. CICADA, he says. The river is us. The river is in our veins. And if we explore this, we can come to a realization that it is so true. That if we don't take care of these things that were given to us to sustain in life, our teaching suggests that it can be taken away. And we as a people in our community understand, we know that if our mother becomes sick, then we will become sick. If the rivers are the lifeblood of our mother, and they become contaminated, then the same happens to us. So I just wanted to share that a little bit with you on how we kind of look at things. Our message where we come from is a message of awareness, maybe a reminder to quote Zime. Sometimes we need to be reminded of these simple little things, but at times we make so complicated ourselves. Aha, miigwech.
Bonjour, I'm Aimee Johnson. I'm from Walpole Island First Nation, or Bekedronong as we call it. Bekedronong in our language means where the waters divide, and it's very indicative of where we are. We are located between Lake Huron and Erie, right at the heart of the Great Lakes, at the mouth of Lake St. Clair, and our community is a delta of, at present, 6 islands, but right between the border of Canada and the United States. It's a very unique place. It's incredible. It's special. We have this beautiful river that runs through our territory. And we are downriver from what's called Canada's Chemical Valley, Sarnia, Ontario. So through the years, we have had some major struggles in upholding our responsibility as Anishinaabe people, the responsibility that has been handed down to us from the Creator to take care of the environment and take care of the land and take care of the river. And I recall being a young child and our community fighting really hard to try to get that recognition and to try to get tighter controls on spills into the river and things like that, and tighter regulations, and watching all of these things happen to the river that we had no control over. Thankfully, we've come a long way. We are very active in remediation and restoration of the St. Clair River in our territory, but it's still not good enough. And so through the years, we've been sitting on binational advisory committees, working with the government of Canada and the United States and a lot of environmental groups and other communities in a collaborative effort. And it's good to see that even just in my lifetime, we've gone from a place where we need to take the government to court to be able to protect the river in the ways that we are supposed to as Anishinaabe people. And now we're sitting down at the table and trying to figure out ways to balance the needs and wants of humans and the needs of the river. But again, like I said, it's still not good enough. We've come a long way. We're seeing now another river in our territory where we're kind of in the beginning stages of watershed planning, collaboratively with other First Nations that share our traditional territory. And so as we're going through these processes, I've seen throughout the years that it's quite often, in terms of conservation and restoration and stewardship of rivers, it tends to be fairly token in the way that our communities have been involved. We're trying to be inserted into a Western-based ideology and ways of taking care of, and a really regulatory and bureaucratic system that doesn't work for us, and it isn't reflective of our connection. And so in this project here, it's been really empowering and I think really incredibly helpful in taking a look at ways that other Indigenous communities around the world are approaching and bringing in their own ways of being into a more modern context of river stewardship and restoration. So as we move forward, even just our visit to the Penobscot Nation, one of the really cool things that we're finding is we go all the way across the world to see what's happening in New Zealand, and our values are so reflected there. We're understood, and finding out better ways to bring these things into practice. So I guess a little more about our community. We're a council of 3 fires, which is Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Odawa. Incredibly rich, diverse community. We've got tall grass prairies, oak savannas, we've got Carolinian forests, world-class wetlands, and just an incredible diversity of species. It's a beautiful place. I'm very lucky to have grown up there, and it means so much to us, both currently and throughout the Anishinaabe history. It's one of our traditional migratory stopping places as we moved into the area and the Great Lakes. So it's been an incredible project so far, and I can see that it's just continuing to get bigger and more powerful, I think. So yeah, miigwech.
Thank you. Our third community we'll hear from the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa from northern Michigan. And is it Brett? Is Brett going to? Brett Fessel.
Good evening. I hadn't prepared any kind of presentation for tonight. Kind of drew the short straw, so to speak. But that's fine. I first wanted to thank Dale and Nick and the whole crew, everybody I've come to know over the past year, and thank for what I've learned. I'm an ecologist. I'm a river ecologist for the Grand Traverse Band, Ottawa, Chippewa. And we're situated in the northern lower portion of Michigan, surrounded by the Great Lakes, 21% of the world's fresh water. I grew up in Michigan, kind of in the city, unaware, naive to tribal culture, to tribal traditions, and to tribes in general, and graduated college as a biologist, and then went on to get my master's and got all the standard Western science knowledge that's necessary for dealing with Western scientists. And 20 years ago was introduced to the Grand Traverse Band. I got hired as a biologist to begin a hunting and fishing program to establish and initiate the hunting and fishing treaty rights case, and to begin within 10 years, I think, or well, I was told within a couple of years. This was in '96. A couple of years we'd be going to court, and we would be negotiating a settlement for treaty rights that have been stated in a treaty from 1836, much like many other treaties in the United States that allow for Indian tribes to exercise hunting and fishing rights. So in 2007, nearly a decade later, finally came to that point. And so my job was to collect information, to collect data, and collect it in a way that was defensible, and basically go and argue with attorneys that this was not going to be of harm to the resources, and that we could manage those activities ourselves, the tribe and the 4 other tribes that were party to that decree. After doing so, negotiating that treaty and going ahead and implementing the licensing and all that, quickly occurred to me that it didn't make a lot of sense to be at odds with the government, the state government, the federal government, the local units of government, etc., over how many fish or how many deer could be harvested by the different groups of people, the most important of which are the indigenous people that were there in Michigan and throughout the United States that maintain the rights to those resources, yet were kind of put into a corner in terms of priority over what those resources would mean to them. And also over those years, I began to learn and feel what you may have felt with Chris's presentation or his story, and Ashleigh's from New Zealand and many other tribes, and trying to explain to non-native scientists, if you will, and managers with the states and feds what what it really means to take care of resources and not just to count them and divide them up into pieces, like so many, dollars and cents. We receive funding from the federal government for our programs, but we also compete heavily for grants from the federal government to conduct restoration work. So by being able to do that, we've been able to sort of put our foot in the door and exercise sort of a right to bring that message back to non-tribal people in terms of restoration, and in particular of restoration of water, fresh water, and rivers in particular. We've always had an affiliation or a real strong connection with rivers ever since I was a kid. I never knew really why, but definitely have come to know why in working with the tribe. I'm here with tribal counselor Mark Wilson, good friend, who's taught me a lot. Of others that members of the tribe that have taught me an incredible amount. I have a great deal of respect for. Frank Dituri, also, who's really helped with the primary project that we're working on, which is the restoration of the Boardman River. It's a fairly large river, not quite as big as the Waikato, but and taking out 4 dams in place, which is a difficult thing to do these days. And we've got one out with the help of dozens of other cooperators and partners. But what's really been the eye-opener and really been the benefit of the tribe's involvement in this has been really waking up the state government, the local units of government, the local community, non-tribal community, to the importance of that river to the tribe, and the fact that it means a lot more than just opening it up for canoers or restoring the fishery within it or any other maybe monetary or other value to it. And what it means to the tribe is was something that just runs way deeper than any statistical analysis that we can offer to the funders, to the regulators, and so on. And so being involved in this project is really, it's kind of it's an adventure in a way. It's a discovery. It's a way to start that discussion, that conversation, and really, in my opinion, help those non-tribal regulators and decision makers, the big guns, the people with the purse strings, really understand what it means to protect and preserve and conserve for future generations, and not just have it be lip service. And through conferences like this, work like Nick and Dale are working on, I'm honored to be a part of that and offer any technical parts of it. But I feel even though I'm not a tribal member, I can feel that connection, and I spend a lot of time talking to people, friends, colleagues, and otherwise that don't get it. They just don't get it. But inevitably, or over time, and talking with them enough and sharing with them, I start to see that, and so that's kind of my goal with the folks that I work with in the state and federal realms. It's to get them to understand, to get them to feel what I feel, and not just to rely solely on the numbers and statistics and the dollars and cents, And so, without any notes, that's kind of what's on my mind and what I've seen as a huge value to this. And if Mark or Frank would like to speak, I'd love to have them come up and share. But with that, thank you very much.
So we can come back to, I was told that we will, if you have any questions, we can deal with it in the question and answer period. So I'd like to introduce my little brother, I guess, Anishinaabe colleague at Dartmouth, and has turned out a good friend. So Nick Rio has been the principal investigator behind this project and our leader, and so he will sort of wrap things up, and then we'll move on to question and answers.
Hello, everyone. Bonjour. We're very happy to be here and to share a little bit of detail about what we're calling a knowledge exchange. And I just wanted to give you some more details, real briefly, about what we did together, our process, our collaborative process, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about why it's worked so well. I've never worked in a project that involved, I've worked in a lot of projects that involve diverse partners, but never have I worked in one where we learned so much in such a short amount of time. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what has worked? So let me just kind of sketch out for you what we did, and then if you have questions about why any of us think that our process worked really well, or questions about the individual work happening within the three communities, we'll just move right into that as quickly as possible. So, but basically our process was to frame the project as first and foremost an Indigenous knowledge exchange. So we wanted to give the communities a chance to get together, spend time together, and learn from one another. That was our first and primary goal. Secondarily, we had research goals. So we wanted to see what we could learn across the three cases through a comparison about the ways that Indigenous knowledge and ways of being are informing river restoration. And basically, we went to each of the communities and we spent time there on the water, on the land, together. And it was an immersive experience. So we spent, day and night together for, say, a week in the Great Lakes, and then a week in New Zealand, and then just recently we spent a couple of days visiting a fourth community in Maine, the Penobscot Nation. So it was immersive. We were together day and night. We did our work of conversing and learning from each other on the water, on the land, to the greatest extent possible. And probably the most important thing is that we were guided by each of the communities, the host communities, when we visited them, about how to initiate our work together, our co-learning. How to start that was really critical, and it was determined by the host community, and we did not rush that process. However long it took to start things out in a good way with particular things that needed to be said, or ceremonies that needed to happen, or protocols that needed to be followed, we made sure to take the time to do those things and not to see them as just the prerequisite to our learning, but as a big part of our learning. And these are the processes that opened the doors for our conversations. So in each of these communities, when they're going to start a project of their own, things have to begin in a certain way. Certain things have to be done to begin the process. And then the work unfolds, and then certain ceremonies or protocols need to be followed to then close that process. And so, in a way, we're in our project, we're mirroring that practice. And I think that thankfully we had a group of collaborators that were all very open to seeing that as an important part of our process, not just something that we needed to get through to then get to the learning, but to be open to seeing that as an important part of the learning itself. With that, any questions that you have about our research process, our knowledge exchange, or the work that's happening in each of the communities, please let's hear some questions.
Thank you. Thanks to our Maori visitors too for coming such a long way. I know how far it is. So I had a question actually about one element of your settlement. You mentioned that the awa is a person. Is that the way it's put?
Yes. So essentially, we went as far as we could to try and say that all the tribes, because as my colleague Ashley said, there are 5 tribes along the river, and we all had an understanding that we all see our river as an ancestor, as a single body with its own life force. And so we tried to seek recognition through that with our settlement. There is actually another tribe further down the North Island who actually got a step further because they built from our settlement and actually got legal status. So their river is its own legal entity.
So I just wondered, like, what form does that take in the kind of legal structures, and then what sort of difference does that make to the way, governments or whoever else you're dealing with, what difference does it make to them?
In terms of difference, what it does is on the other side of our settlement principles being mana whakahaere, it's about. So the first settlement principle is about the river itself, that it is its own person, it's our ancestor. The second part is our connection and relationship to that river. And so in terms of how it works in the legal or policy side, what it does is it promotes, encourages, and in some cases enforces agencies or industries to integrate how they are managing or how they're affecting our river. So what it does is, because there is just so much legislation regarding environment, whether it be airspace or land bank, so many agencies, what that settlement does is that it often overrides a lot of the other settlements, so that it says that this is the primary direction of how this river will be, the effects and activities that will take place on it. These are the people who will make that decision, which is half tribal people and half Crown agencies, because we said, essentially our argument was, well, the Crown, you actually cause these problems, so therefore you should be at the table to help us clean it up, to keep them accountable. Yeah, so what it does is it changes people's thinking of working in isolation to then having to look at a project or activity and think, okay, how can we all work to this together? Yeah.
Hello, sorry, it's kind of hard. So my question is probably to the biologists in the group and maybe some other people there, because I'm a fellow biologist as well. And I'm happy to see that there are some biologists in the room. I think that having biologists for any type of conversation with any type of government is really a requirement, because I think data speaks for itself. Now my question is, how receptive are governments to hard data, to hard evidence? Would you suggest that any type of program that is trying to start a negotiation process with a government have a study that backs up whatever you're asking for? Or is that something that sometimes is just overseen, or what are your suggestions? Thank you.
Hey, Brett, I'll let you take part of this. You bet. Maybe to take your question a little farther is that we struggled with this question between the group during many conversations, and to have folks schooled in Western science as part of the team to represent each tribe. There were also some pieces of that were understood by, like, our natural resource department at the Grand Traverse Band is supported by council, and the council relies upon the Western science background with the data that you talk about. There we go. I thought I was speaking loud enough, but our department relies upon the Western science background with the data to support that, to, Brett said it earlier, get our foot in the door for some components of large-scale projects. But what's more important is once the conversation begins, the data, it seems like you can, we can all allow data to say some of the things we like. I think the real important piece of that is being at the table in the conversation. And what we've seen, even recently, is as being at the table for the conversation with our government in a government-to-government, face-to-face exchange. Those gains from a project perspective filter out in many ways that are not even project related, specific to that data that you talked about. But it was the data and parts of it that got us to the table. And just to allow that communication, being able, again, to sit at the table, to have, 2 weeks ago, we were at a community meeting with this large project that we're involved in, and we have councilors sitting at the table with local governments, and having the local governments hear our councilor mention, after many folks provide comment, that the reason that they're involved in this project, and I'll digress, I'll drum back a little bit. A lot of folks that don't understand the band's position may think, or do think, what's in it for the band? Why are you here? What do you get out of this project? And then to have one of our counselors at this meeting with the public explain that his ancestors have been there for thousands of years, and there's dams, the 3 that we're trying to remove over the last 120 years, and the memories of the families that sit there, that's a post-European settlement community, can remember 60, 80, 100 years through the communications in their own generations. But to have tribal council sit there and explain to people, and you could hear a pin drop, you could feel the response in the community, start to understand the ties between the indigenous peoples of that land and the waters that were there. I think that transcends all the data that we actually use to get in the door. I guess that's a long way around your question, but that's really where I see the gains from our perspective.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for all coming here. My name is JP, and I'm really fascinated by the project itself. And I work for a First Nation in BC, and I'm wondering, like, what brought you together, and how would I do that as an employee for my First Nation? Like, what was it that got people connected? And yeah, I'd like to learn more about that.
So I think that I was lucky enough to have relationships with each of the communities, some that dated back really far, between 12, 13-year long relationships, and had a new relationship with the Waikato Tainui, and we had common interests. And folks, I think the fact that we framed it first as a knowledge exchange with underlying research questions embedded in there, and had the community members and tribal officials help us create those questions. So it's not like, well, we're gonna get everybody together, and then along the side, Dale and I are gonna be, taking some notes and having this research process. everybody was very involved in thinking together, what are the key questions here, what could be learned beyond the communities that could be written in a paper or a book that would other people would want to hear about and learn something from. And I think that folks recognize the value of learning community to community. I think it was fast-tracked a little bit because I had, at least with 2 of the 3 communities, pretty long-standing relationships, and folks trusted that I wouldn't create a team and a process that would kind of get out of hand and become a waste of time or counterproductive. So I was lucky to have, I think, some trust in the community members. But other thoughts on that?
Mention Colleen as well. Mention Colleen as a third.
Yeah, and we also had have a third colleague that wasn't able to attend this conference, who has a lot of experience in river basin work and in political ecology. And her ability to frame the questions in a way that really resonated for the communities was also very key. Other thoughts, though?
Kia ora. I'm actually warmed to hear that you're interested in doing something like this. So as a result, actually, of our first get-together, when we went home, I met with our tribal leaders, and we're actually investing in some kind of international portal to facilitate the dialogue with for Indigenous knowledge, in particular for the restoration of fresh waters. So thank you for expressing your interest. And you're more than welcome to come to New Zealand.
I'm also very grateful that you've all come so far, participated in this session, which I found just extremely fascinating. And the project is quite suggestive and interesting. We're working with a group of basically NGO land rights pastoralists from East Africa, and we've been deliberating on should we go to various places as a group, or should different people go out, get information, and then bring it back. And so I'm quite intrigued by the actual mechanics. Is the most fruitful experience you're having when you sit around a table yourselves and you talk about your different experiences? Or is it when you go to a community and you're like a commission, I suppose, maybe the Benghazi Commission or something like that, and you're asking questions of a community group and then receiving those answers? What is the actual dynamic whereby you're receiving information, eliciting it, and then sharing it and deliberating on it in your own group?
I think I can speak for everybody here when I say actually being in the community, on the land, and seeing the community's connections to the things that they're doing, and their pride in what's happening, and their sadness in some of the things that are happening and that they're struggling with. It's incredible. It's so much more powerful than sharing information around a table or in a presentation, or it's just incredible. It really is, and it hits home. And then as you get to sharing these experiences and all of the different work that communities are doing, it leads to other things. So I'm finding now I'm in a community planning role in my community now, still working on the river work as well, but I'm finding that there are so many applications in so many other ways, and so it gives us an opportunity to not just share on our river stewardship, but in the entire holistic way of governance and community well-being, and so it becomes so much more and more holistic in the sense that that's how we do things as Indigenous communities. It's not just one piece; it's everything.
But you actually go as a whole group in a bus or in a set of vans.
We spent a lot of time in big vans.
Yeah, I think we could all attest to this, and Nick hit it first, trust in establishing some long-term relationships, because I think, as y'all probably are aware or familiar with, working especially in Indian country, pulled a million different ways, very little time, and it's difficult. You know, it's wonderful to think of the notion of getting involved in a project like this, but very easy to say, well, hey, I just don't have the time. So that really opens the door, kind of cracks the can open. But then once that happened, at least from my perspective, and I know the leadership that I worked for, 3 counselors traveled with us to New Zealand, and one of the vice chairman of our tribe asked me in the bus, one of the 2, which we were all in, and just having just wonderful discussions, and that's when it really happens. That's when the organic part works. It's not in any kind of formal, framework. But she asked me what I thought, what am I taking home, and what's the biggest value that I'm going to get out of this, having spent a week with them. And I thought about it. I'm trying to think of this really profound statement, and it occurred to me, it's the relationship that now I've established with you, my leader, and other leaders that were with us that in my 20 years working for the tribe, I never had. And once that bond was established and trust internally, it just was like, it just lit the fuse, and it's hard to explain, but being at the place, being there, and instead of me going or Frank going or going away, experiencing what we experienced, and then try and bring back to the leadership and so on, and all that excitement, they're, it's just a vacation that you took. They were there. They felt it along with us, and that's really, really what made the difference. That's the best way I could put it.
Nothing can replace actually being there and spending time together and getting to know each other. What I found was that, and Aimee had touched on it just a moment ago too, is that it's been more than just river restoration projects. There's so much that I've learned from each nation about, we have a serious problem in our community with the loss of our language, and seeing how these communities have the efforts that they've been able to make with bringing their native language back to their youth and raising them with as first language speakers has been real inspiring to me as a tribal leader, and giving me good, strong ideas on what I would do to incorporate that into our nation.
Any other questions or?
Yeah, maybe just to be a little more linear, and maybe this sounds like a high school essay or something, but how do we change the world? And the having worked to justify a couple of large team projects, partnered projects, earlier in my career with 1 or 2 First Nations in Canada, and more recently these larger international efforts. I had these crises of confidence. What the hell difference is this going to make? So the linear question is, what, in terms of your objectives to protect and restore rivers, what practical outcomes have you experienced, or do you see coming that would not have occurred without your collaboration?
Great question. So I guess in the work that I do, and specifically on river watershed planning and restoration, initially when was a part of this initial group with the Thames River. It's called the Thames River Clearwater Revival Initiative. It's a collaborative group, municipalities, various branches of the federal government, Ministry of Agriculture, Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, and a whole host of others, and all of the First Nation communities that have the Thames River within their traditional territory. So the initial phases, because it was a very early stage project, and everybody was just kind of coming together and trying to figure out what all the goals were, and a lot of the work was like largely based on issues with algae blooms and nutrient loading into Lake Erie because of the Thames River. So initially, it seemed to me like our involvement in the project was going the way so many of our involvements have, being that, you know, we'll include a little bit of traditional knowledge, a little bit of history, a little bit of culture, but we won't really be coming out with something that meets our needs. It will still not be good enough. It won't be. It will never be good enough based on a lot of the regulations and the allowances that Western science has allowed to occur, and some of the things that governments have allowed to occur and municipalities have allowed to occur. So after learning about some of the cases, like in particular the river in New Zealand that has rights of personhood, I looked a little further into it. There's also one in Ecuador that has the same rights, and there are some test cases now happening. So that's what we are shooting for. Right, because of course we are of the river. You know, it makes sense that it should have the same rights as us. You know, it shouldn't be okay for us to do the things to the river that have happened. And so that's what we're shooting for. And instead of just having a little bit of traditional knowledge here and a word from our chief in the beginning, we want to lead this. We want to lead this because it is our responsibility as Anishinaabe people to look after the land because it looks after us.
I'd like to say something real quick related to that. Sorry, Nick. Everyone at this table and the entire group, we've all learned from each other and continue to. And we could sit here for the next 2 hours and I could tell you how these influenced our project. I'll just throw a couple out there from Chris. We called Chris, this was 6 or 8 months ago, and part of our restoration process is on the Boardman River. Boardman River was named after a fellow that wound up settling in that part of the world in 1848, cut every tree down within 300 miles, left in 1852 without a tree standing. They named the river after him. So part of our effort is to rename that, its original name. And our efforts have been headed that direction for 2 years. We had a conversation with Chris, and just to call up and to have his input and his wisdom. Those things have to come. He said those things have to come from the ground, from the grassroots. They have to come from the bottom up. You can't stand in front of folks and even ask for that kind of thought process to occur. It has to be born, and that's the way we kind of look to the community and every member that we talk to along the way. We just remind them there was another name. It didn't take long. Just continually remind people there were other names without saying we need to change this. It was more like, you know, this used to be called, and look at this map. This is what it used, and it grew on its own, and we're at a point now where that's gaining steam. Everywhere in our connection to the project, Ashleigh, the way what we learned in New Zealand about the way folks, the way their tribe looks at the river, we're so used to looking at the river, we never bothered to think about looking out from the river, and that's certainly something that we learned, is that the grandmother river is looking out at us, the way we're behaving, and maybe doesn't look to the same way that we might relate to the pieces that we want to restore. The river looks out, and I think that has certainly allowed us talk to the design engineers and the consultants that work on these projects and have them maybe not understand it at a spiritual level, but let us explain at an ecological level, supported by data, with that spirituality behind it. And it's, again, I could sit here for hours and talk about for everyone at this table and all the folks on this team how we've grown from it, but it's there constantly.
I can also throw in a couple of examples. So this project has been probably a direct contributor to invoking and maintaining excitement, particularly in our youth, for river restoration and freshwater management. We currently have 20 staff in our organisation, and 4 of us have been privileged to spend 3 trips now together. So that's almost a quarter of our team. When our friends came to New Zealand, everyone in our organisation was involved. So not just the River Trust or our organisation, but also our commercial arm, our education arm, as well as our social arm. So everyone was involved in the hosting opportunities. Social media is powerful. So, I'm on Facebook and Instagram every day, posting 3 to 4 times a day, sharing our experiences back home. And it's almost like, they're here with us. And so I think that's important in terms when it comes to succession, and that wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for this project. And as I said before, as a direct result of our visit last year, I was able to, one of our tribal leader, our general manager, actually came with us, and so we were able to go back home and, coming into the new financial year when we did our planning, looking at how we can facilitate more projects and be involved in more projects like this, and potentially fund them. And I think that's important. Another one is, in New Zealand, when we talk about freshwater, we're only allowed to use the words rights and interests. Just recently, my GM shared with me that we are going to be pushing for ownership of freshwater, allocation to freshwater, and that's a big step for us. And it can be a bit nerve-wracking, but at the same time, I'm excited because we come halfway across the world, and our friends who are experiencing the same issues, fighting for the same things, you can't help but just feel empowered, and you go home you just feel really humbled, and it just gives you the energy that you need, because it's draining, but it's good.
So I know that it's getting late, and I thank everybody for staying with us. I'd like to get to one last question in front here, and then we'll wrap up the panel. So, please.
Buenas noches. Escuché a alguien decir que hay un problema serio de la comunidad que ha sido la pérdida del lenguaje. Entonces quisiera compartir otra experiencia más. ¿Cuáles fueron las causas que originó la pérdida del lenguaje? Esta es la pregunta.
The language was lost through acts of Congress in the United States, at least I can speak for, that had forced assimilation into this new American culture. And what they would do was take our children at a young age and take them far from home to Indian boarding schools, where they would dress them European, cut their hair, and essentially beat the language out of them. My father was my father's generation, for my family at least, was the first that that wasn't forced to go to the boarding schools, and my children's generation are the first to actually have it back in their school system. Maybe my friends from Walpole Island, if you want to speak to the Canadian effort.
That's it in a nutshell. These schools were put in place to assimilate, and it's as simple as that. But we do hear this language loss. We hear this in our communities, and in our community, just to give you an idea how we've been impacted, our membership is roughly 4,500 community members. Half live in the community, half live off. Of our first speakers, we're less than 1%. We have an actual number, and that number is 18 that we have in our community that are first speakers of the language. And they're generally elderly. There's surrounding communities that have no speakers. But those speakers that are in our community have a message for us. And they say that our language is not lost. It is here. It is within each and every one of us. That shkude de'ing, that fire, that spiritual fire is inside. We just have to find it within ourselves to do what we can to waken it. So our community, Piketranong, is working on just that. So the government set out and they recognized and they acknowledged that the key to assimilation is the children. To take the Indian out of the child. That's the key, they says. Today we say, let's use that same tactic. Let's recognize the wisdom in that. If we're to have any chance at language revitalization and restoration amongst our people, then we need to focus on the key, which is the children. And I'm happy to say that this September in our community is the start of our immersion program at our junior kindergarten level to acknowledge that. We recognize that. It's not to say that the ones that are in their adult lives don't have this ability, because they do, and the door will always be open for those who want to join in that effort to do what they can to help with this language restoration, this language revitalization. Miigwech.
Thank you again, everybody, for staying so late and participating in this panel. Yeah.